Well, hello, I'm Paul Vander, host for Ridgecrest Talk here on Friday night, and I'm here with Brenda Burnett from the Kerncrest Audubon Society. We're going to be talking about birds. I did want to make one announcement. We did have some technical difficulties with our newscast, and the newscast will be, it was recorded, but it did not show this evening. It will be showing tomorrow morning, Saturday at 9 a.m., as well as Monday morning at 9 a.m., so you can pick up the news at that later time as well. Let's go ahead and introduce Brenda, who is our local president. Is that right?
Yes.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about, briefly about the organization. How long has it been here? How long have you been involved?
Oh, my. Kerncrest Audubon has been here since the 1950s, possibly the 40s, I believe. I came in 1970, but didn't get really active as a bird watcher until around 78, 80, something like that. So I was born down the road in Red Mountain, but I wasn't a bird watcher then.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think about that as kids. You're just running around doing so many things, but there's so many things in the environment and in the community all around you that you don't pay attention to, and then later on, all of a sudden you learn. And we usually get together beforehand. I sat down with dinner with you this evening, and I was just amazed at how little I knew about the birds in the valley, as well as in Southern California and overall. There's just so much to learn. The other week we had eagle rafting. Joe Chesney was talking about rafting down the Upper Kern River.
Which is fun.
And he was explaining about, you know, all the challenges of not having enough water and the drought and the problems that we're having from that. And I imagine with birds, you're going to have those same type of challenges. And I guess before we talk about the drought, we need to understand kind of the migration and the patterns of birds. Can you talk to us a little bit about the migration?
Yeah, we have an amazing number of birds that come through the Indian Wells Valley and the local canyons because we're on a major migration route between North America and Central America. And the birds coming north come up the Colorado River. This is warblers and flycatchers and all kinds of birds they call passerines, songbirds, little ones. And they come to the local canyons and then proceed up into the Sierras and go north. Right now, going south, we have tons, if you can imagine tons of birds this big, of hummingbirds coming through, of about 5 different species of hummingbird. We've got feeders in our yard, and you're swarmed when you walk out. And then shortly, toward the end of the month, we'll have turkey vultures that people see every year. What you don't realize about the turkey vultures is the ones you see every day are different. You're not... People think they go roost in their neighborhood and then they come back every night, but they don't. They go on, and the next night it's different birds roosting in their neighborhood.
Right, so we're not close enough to actually see which bird it is, so if we're calling a bird Sam, that might be Joe that's there the next day.
That's right, that's right. And you don't ban turkey vultures because they vomit all over you.
That doesn't sound like a lot of fun, does it? Yeah, I was out gardening this morning and I saw a hummingbird, and it's always enjoyable to see those birds. And in looking at the National Audubon Society's video that they have on the website, it talks about how wherever birds are, that's where people are. And it's a good indicator that if you're not seeing birds there, then you're going to have a problem with the people being there as well. And I think that's a good indicator, because birds are just, they're not the top of the food chain, but they're somebody, a certain animal that's only going to go to those areas that has something to offer.
Some are pretty much the top of the food chain in their chain, like eagles. The biggest birds are the main predators in some areas.
Right. Well, that's such an advantage being up in the air and compete. And then, of course, I heard that roadrunners are territorial, and we have a roadrunner that comes over into the garden. Enjoy letting him eat some of the worms and have his time in the garden as well. Now, you're saying that in the migration, when they're coming from the south to the north, which would be, what, about 6 months from now, opposite?
Mid-April to mid-May is the peak of the migration northward.
It's not even 6 months. It's only about 4 or 5 months
ago.
They're coming from the Colorado River across the desert, and then they're hitting the Sierra Nevada right in this area.
Right in this area, which is why recently all of our southern Sierra canyons, Bird Springs Canyon and Cow Heaven Canyon and Sand Canyon, all of those canyons have been designated an important bird area because they realized how many birds come this way.
Yeah, and I hear all those canyons, different people are doing different activities, and they talk about that, and it's just a way to, the nearest way to get out and see something different than being out here in the desert. And I know I went up to one of the canyons to look at some of the petroglyphs not too long ago. But now realizing there's so many things to do with the birds. What are some of the areas that we have in particular with types of birds here in the greater area, specifically that Audubon Society is involved with?
Well, like Sand Canyon?
Right.
Or farther away. Sand Canyon is really the most wonderful place around to go birding because you can drive quite a ways in and then hike along the stream, which is not true of many of the canyons. Like Short Canyon, the trail goes up along the side.
So for a beginner, if we had someone at home that's saying, this is interesting, but I'm not that familiar with it, Sand Canyon would be one of their first trips they want to take.
Red-tailed hawks nest up there every spring. Nuttall's woodpeckers nest up there. Right now it's full of warblers coming through on their way south. Yeah, that's a really good place.
Now talking about some of the...
Surprise Canyon over in the Panamints is a good place.
Right. Talking about some of the things that happen either during the drought or during the migration each year, what are some of the challenges that the birds have to meet? And specifically, we were talking about what we can do in the community to make it safer for the birds.
Well, here on the desert, probably the main thing you can do is have water. They love to find a yard with a pond or with a bird bath. We just get all kinds of robins every day in our bird bath. Even Cooper's hawks will come and perch on the bird bath.
What about,
and of course, bird feeders.
The pipes with the holes?
Pipes, that's a real issue in the spring when the birds are on their way south. The little nesting birds that nest in holes, like flycatchers and bluebirds, mountain bluebirds, will check out the hole in a pipe. They'll fly in to see if it's a good place to nest, and of course the hole goes straight down, and they can't get out, and they die by the thousands. Mining claims are a big problem, and there have been laws passed in several states against using open pipe for mining claims. You now have to cap them or have them be a solid pipe.
All right, so that's our first tip of the day.
Fence posts are still a problem.
Is to get rid of those pipes and cover them up.
And
we're going to talk about that some more after the break. This is Paul Vanderwerf with Ridgecrest Talk, and thank you for tuning in today. Well, welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk. I'm Paul Vanderwerf, and I have my guest right here, Brenda Burnett from the Kerncrest Audubon Society, and we're talking about birds today. And we were talking about some of the challenges during their migration, and one of them that we can do locally to help our birds is to cover any pipes or openings that are going to be smaller and not a safe place for the birds to go in to look for a nest. There's a couple other things we can do. One of them we were talking about was with the drought, there's just not enough water for a certain species of bird. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I see you were showing me during the break what they look like, but why don't you tell the audience a little bit about them?
Right. There's a bird, we have a very common bird around here called a red-winged blackbird, but his wings are actually red and yellow. But there's also a rarer bird that has nested in the past up in around Lake Isabella in the marshland up there called a tricolored blackbird. And he's in trouble because of the drought, because he needs marshland to nest. And we have a grant at Kerncrest Audubon Society. Actually, we're sharing that with Kern Audubon Society, which is in Bakersfield, to get some water to some marshland that's in actually almost downtown Lake Isabella, and try to restore some habitat for those birds to nest up there.
Right, and I guess the good part of that news is there was a developer trying to put in an 80-room hotel right there next to that marsh, and they've since stopped that. So I think that's good news for the swamp. But we don't have enough of those marsh areas around, and I'm sure that's something that we often don't think of when we start to develop. We don't have that many marshlands. I'm sure Ridgecrest doesn't have too many.
No.
some of the other places that the Ridgecrest Audubon Society actually is from all the way up in Kernville, Lake Isabella, all the way down to Ridgecrest. And so you are actively involved in there. I've driven by and seen a sign over there that says the Audubon Society. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that facility there?
That is actually that doesn't belong to Ridgecrest. That is the Audubon, California Kern River Preserve. And the National Audubon Society is divided up into sections, and we have state organizations as well as the national. And that land up there was initially bought by the, who did I say? The Nature Conservancy. And then they don't manage parcels, so they turned it over to the Audubon Society, who manages it as a preserve for. There is a tremendous variety of birds up in the Kern River Valley because they're at the convergence of several ecological zones. And they have since acquired way more land up there and more than tripled the original size of the preserve.
So that preserve is so important it actually has state and national attention to keep that funded, and it's actually growing and getting more sophisticated and complex every year.
Well, bigger.
Well, bigger means more challenging.
They don't get more money for managing it, so it doesn't increase staff. It just increases land.
More responsibility. That sounds like a common theme. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other birds. I mean, there's just so many birds. Did we talk about the turkey vultures a little bit yet?
No, I think we didn't.
Why don't you share a little bit about the turkey vultures?
I did mention that the birds you see every day are not the same birds, that they're landing and the next day more birds are coming through. But for a period of at least 10 years, and I think it may have been 15, we did a turkey vulture count up in Weldon, actually in the Kelso River Valley, south of Weldon. And we had teams of people sitting out there all morning watching the birds come through. And what turkey vultures do is they will come in an evening and land and roost in cottonwood trees or any big trees. We have some here in Ridgecrest that roost in pine trees for the night. And then in the morning they will take off and they will what we call kettle, which is just kind of swarm, come around in circles, and you think they're going to run into each other, and they're by the hundreds and sometimes by the thousands until they get way up high and they've used this thermal to gain enough altitude that they can take off, and they usually have a leader that decides when it's time to go, and he will just take off, and then they go single file. So people say, how do you count these birds? Well, when they're going single file, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you count them.
Right. So not when they're flying in a circle, but once they decide to take off, that's the time to count and see how many you have.
And we have seen 1,000 in a swarm.
Wow.
In a flock go by. We've had as many as 30,000 a year go through Kernville.
So that's like a major stop for them to rest for the night, and then off they go the next day.
Now, not that many roost there. Most of them are roosting up along the top of the mountains. But I think one night we had 3,000 roosts down along the valley.
Well, that's a lot to count. I guess you have to have one of those counter indicators to try to keep track.
Piece of paper.
What are some of the contests? Because there's other things that you talked about where you count birds and you see how many different types of birds. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was saying you can bird for conservation, or you can just bird for sport. And people who bird for sport have contests to see how many birds they can see in a day, or they have contests to see how many birds they can see in a given area. Like I know people who keep a list of what they've seen in Kern River or in Kern County. And then maybe some people saw the movie The Big Year. There are people who do a big year, and they start at noon on a given day and go until noon that same day the following year and race to see each other, to see how many birds they can see. And they do things like get on airplanes and fly to Alaska because they hear there's a certain wagtail up there or something.
It's almost like chasing a storm. You're chasing the birds wherever they are. That's where you go.
Right, right.
And so there's a Kern County contest?
There's Kern County's biggest weekend that we do every year at the same time as our birdathon. We have a local birdathon that teams of people get together and go out and see how many birds they can see, and we get pledges for contributions, and the team that gets the most birds gets an extra contribution or something. We don't really do it that formally, but there's also the Kern County biggest weekend where there's a national competition to see which county in the country has the most birds. And they have, as I think it's San Luis Obispo County usually wins for the total most birds because they have both inland habitat and ocean habitat. So an opportunity to count birds that we don't. But Kern County, here it was, May 1st through 4th this year. So it'll be beginning of May next year as well. And that's the same weekend always as our birdathon. But Kern County always wins the birdiest inland county competition because we have the Sierra Nevada and the Kern River Valley and marshlands, and we have the desert and just a huge variety of different species of birds.
And that's when you start sharing all that information, I start getting a little overwhelmed and at the same time excited that there's just so much more out there. I think it's like that saying, you've forgotten more than I'm going to learn. And we're going to go ahead and take a break here in just a few seconds, and we're going to come back for one more segment to talk about how people can get involved. This is Paul Vanderwerf with Ridgecrest talking with Brenda Burnett from the Ridgecrest Audubon Society. And we're going to just really enjoy this time. Welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk. I'm Paul Vanderwerf with Brenda Burnett from the Ridgecrest Audubon Society. And we've talked a little bit about the migration, a little bit about some of the birds that come through in the area. Actually, Kern County, as an inland county, is if not the most, one of the most best places to see birds in the country, which is kind of amazing. But once you understand some of the history and migration and things, it starts to make a little bit more sense. What we want to do is we want to talk about how can people get involved and what are the events that are coming up and the different groups. Let's talk, what's one of the big events you have coming up this month?
There is a Turkey Vulture Festival at the Kern River Preserve. To get there, you go west on Highway 178 to just before the road that cuts off and goes to Kernville. It's past Weldon.
Right, it's right there at there's Kelso River,
place.
and then there's the Weldon Methodist Church, and then just before Kelso Valley, I believe, is the exit. If you pass Kelso Valley, you're too far, and it's right there on the right. All there is that one sign with the big tree there.
It may be just past Kelso Valley.
Right near there. That's the middle school for Southport, and on that road. But that's a tremendous facility that they have there, and that's going to be September 27th. What time does that start?
There is an early morning bird walk at 6:30, I think it is. And that's not the right one. But then most of the events start at the preserve it's at 6 a.m. is the early birding walk. And you have to be at the preserve before that to go on that. The rest of the events start at 7:30.
And do they go throughout the day?
They go throughout the day. It kind of gets hot and starts to wind down noonish, but after that there's lunch and music. And
so if you're an early bird and you want to get there at 6 a.m., you're probably wanting to head out the door at what, 4:45 or so?
Oh, it's just an hour up there from here.
So 4:45 would get you there at 5:45.
Right. We'll get you there at 5:45.
So yeah, you're going to be up in the morning. You're going to be the early bird to see the early birds at 4:30 in the morning to go up to Kern Valley to check that out. Now they also have some cleanup projects up there that are usually the third Saturday of the month. You have those coming up too, right?
We have one coming up on I say we. This is a Kern Valley event. They have it on the 20th, and it's also at the preserve. And, you know, I don't know what time that starts, but do you have the website for the...
Right. We'll talk about how they can look up this information. But you have the third Saturday in September, which is September 20th. And then, again, we're having another cleanup in October on the third Saturday. And then I think it was same in November. And then December, they went to the second Saturday, probably not wanting to be so close to Christmas. And so that's a great opportunity if people get involved. You can just go out that one day and say, hey, I'm here to check it out and to help out. You meet there at the preserve. They provide all the tools. They tell you what needs to be done. It's open to all ages, right?
Oh, sure.
So it looks like we just have some great events coming up. September we're kind of finished with our summer. The temperatures are cooling down a little bit. We can go up there. We have the Turkey Vulture Watch, September 27th.
Now let's talk about Ridgecrest Audubon Society has a program on Thursday, September 25th at 7 p.m. And Reed Tollefson, who's the manager of the Kern River Preserve, is going to come talk to us and update us on what's going on at the preserve. That's at the Matarango Museum at 7 o'clock.
And is that your regular meeting?
That's our regular meeting. It's every other month on the third Thursday, except this month it's on the fourth Thursday.
So generally, once every 2 months, you're having a speaker and a meeting here in town at the museum, the Matarango Museum.
Yes. And then we have monthly bird walks, field trips, and those are always, they can be found in our newsletter, which you can receive by joining. And you can also access it on our website, which is...
Well, I know I went just on a search engine and typed in Ridgecrest Audubon Society, and it popped up with the
Ridgecrest Audubon Society. I believe it's www.kerncrestaudubon.org.
KernCrestAudubon.org. Okay. And that's a great way. I went on there and I was able to find out, you know, all the local officers, a little bit about the organization. If people don't have access to the internet, they could also just call the museum. Do they have that when it's scheduled?
Yeah. Okay. Well, now, what they'll do is they'll give you my phone number, which is fine.
They'll say, call Brenda.
Right. Or Dan. My husband Dan also.
All right.
Takes calls.
You also have junior, you have something for the
kids?
We
have junior Audubon clubs at Inyo Kern School and at Fowler School. And they meet every Tuesday before school at 7 a.m.
So they go to school early, they're the early birds as well, huh? Wow, that's a lot of information for a group that I didn't even know was here in town. Now there's one place I noticed in town that I drove by, I never really understood what was going on, is over by the animal control facility on the County Line Road.
Oh, yes.
There's a sign that says something about birds, but I've never figured out what is that.
That is the watchable wildlife area that the city of Ridgecrest started to establish several years ago and really hasn't done much with. But if you go down there, if you're interested in seeing things like grebes and shorebirds that don't all that often come inland, the best place around is on the base at the sewer ponds, but you can't get there unless you work on the base. So the second best place is down by the animal shelter, and that's the old sewer ponds. And you just follow the sign to the watchable wildlife area, and you have to kind of climb over a pile of dirt and around a fence.
You can park and walk in there? And when is that?
Great bird watching.
Anytime that it's daylight hours?
Anytime that it's daylight hours, and it has different birds year-round. We have ruddy ducks that nest there in the spring and spend the winter, and shovelers, mostly ducks, but some shorebirds also.
Now, do we have, what do they call that down in Florida? They have the retirees that come down to Florida every year, and then they go back up. Do we have people...
Snowbirds?
Yes,
snowbirds. We have snow geese.
Snowbirds that
we have snow geese that come here. About 3,000 snow geese spend the winter here every year and poop on our grass lawns and on the golf courses. And
yeah, that's actually quite a sight. I remember seeing those.
Around town saying, bark, bark, bark. They're really fun.
Right. I'm a person who likes to compost and likes to get my garden as good soil as I can, and I look 3,000 geese. If I could get them onto my property instead of having to run around trying to clean that up, that would be the great way to go.
Right.
All right. Well, we're just about done. We've had a great time learning about the Ridgecrest Audubon Society, how to get a hold of you guys, and we just want to go ahead and wrap this up. This is Paul Vanderwerf, the host tonight for Ridgecrest Talk with our guest Brenda Burnett from the Ridgecrest Audubon Society. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a great weekend.